The chandeliers burned like captured starlight, scattering shards of brilliance across the polished marble floor. Every gown shimmered like liquid fire, every jeweled crown blazed with pride, yet for Elara, the radiance was a prison. She stood pressed against the cold stone pillar, her hands twisting in the folds of her faded gown. The music swelled, violins and harps weaving a melody meant for joy, but to her it sounded like chains. Each note reminded her of where she did not belong. The daughters of noble houses floated across the dance floor, laughter spilling from painted lips. Their wolves shimmered within them, radiant presences that hummed with life. Elara felt none of it. Her own wolf, the one she had been promised since birth, was a faint flicker at best, a candle flame trembling in a storm, never strong enough to ignite. She was 21, yet still wolfless, still broken. The court knew it, whispered it, judged it. Omega, they called her, the lowest, the weakest. The word followed her, like a shadow she could never escape. Her parents stood on the balcony above, wrapped in silks, their expressions masks of disappointment. They had pinned their hopes on Celestine, their golden child, their pride. Celestine, with hair like fire and eyes that gleamed with alpha strength. Celestine, who drew suitors with nothing more than a smile. Celestine, who moved across the ballroom now, radiant and untouchable. Elara's gaze caught her sister's, just for a breath. Celestine's lips curved, beautiful and cruel all at once, before she was swept away in another's arms. Elara pressed herself harder against the stone, wishing she could disappear. The air felt heavy, thick with perfumes and pride, choking her. Every laugh sounded like mockery. Every glance felt like a dagger. She wanted to shrink, to fold herself into nothing, to escape the endless reminder of what she lacked. He, a gown, simple and pale, was a poor disguise for the truth. She was not radiant. She was not strong. She was not wanted. Even the servants glided with more confidence than she. Elara's gift, if it could be called one, was a curse in their eyes. Her empathy, her ability to feel emotions not her own, left her fragile. It overwhelmed her, battered her with feelings that did not belong to her. She felt the sharp desire of the men chasing Celestine. She felt the disdain of the women who envied her sister's power. She felt her parents' tight-lipped disappointment, sharp as thorns. And underneath it all, she felt her own despair, her own loneliness, her own longing. It was too much, always too much. She closed her eyes, tried to breathe past the storm of borrowed emotions. But they pressed in, relentless, suffocating. Elara swallowed hard, forcing her shoulders straight. If she broke here, if she showed weakness, the wolves would eat her alive. She had survived this long by becoming small, by fading into corners, by swallowing her words. Perhaps tonight would be no different. Perhaps she could last the night unseen, unheard, untouched. Yet part of her still ached to be seen, to be wanted, to be more than the forgotten shadow at her sister's side. Her gaze drifted again to the glittering floor. The dancers spun like constellations in motion, pairs twining, laughter rising. Each couple was a universe, whole and complete, and she was a void. Her heart clenched, a dull ache she had long since grown used to. No one would ask her. No one ever had. The thought settled like ash in her chest. Still, she pretended not to care. Her lips curved into a ghost of a smile, though it hurt to hold it. She told herself it did not matter. She told herself she was fine. But her reflection in the marble floor whispered otherwise. The night pressed on, cruel in its beauty. Every cheer, every spin of silk and gold reminded her of her exile within her own family. She was a ghost at her own sister's celebration. The shadows clung to her, cold and familiar. Her fingers dug into the pillar, grounding her in stone. She had lived like this all her life, an outsider among her own blood. And yet, somewhere deep within, a voice whispered that something was shifting. Something unseen. Something waiting. Something vast. She tried to silence it, tried to drown it beneath the weight of her shame. But the whisper remained. The air itself seemed to tremble, carrying a current she could not name. Her gift prickled, her chest tightening with emotions not her own. It was not her sister's glee. It was not her parents' disappointment. It was not the envy, the desire, the cruelty of the court. No, this was different, darker, stronger. A storm rolling toward the ballroom, unseen but inevitable. Elara shivered though the hall was warm. She pressed her back to the pillar, her eyes darting to the great doors. The music faltered. A note broke, sharp and jarring. The dancers slowed, unease rippling through the hall. Laughter died mid-breath. The air thickened, heavy, waiting. Her heart stuttered, pounding against her ribs. Her gift screamed at her now, a flood of emotions crashing through her. Fear, awe, anticipation, and something primal, an instinct as old as wolves themselves. The storm had come. The doors groaned open, the sound echoing like thunder. Gasps scattered like sparks through the assembly. Elara's hands trembled, her breath caught in her throat. She did not yet see him, but she felt him. Every heart in the room beat faster, every breath grew shallow. The storm had entered the hall. The great doors yawned wide, spilling shadows into the glittering hall. The music did not resume. The silence was louder than any song, heavy enough to crush the air from trembling lungs. Boots struck the marble floor, each step measured, deliberate, echoing like distant thunder rolling across mountains. Every noble, every warrior, every maiden turned as one, their bee. Odie stiff with instinctive fear. The scent of power, sharp and electric, swept through the room like a storm wind. Elara's gift screamed inside her chest, 1,000 emotions colliding, terror, reverence, awe, submission. Her own breath caught, shallow and uneven, as if her lungs no longer obeyed her. The figure in the doorway was more shadow than flesh, broad shoulders framed in black armour that drank the chandelier's light. His presence bent the air, made it crackle, made it ache. King Aric Thorne, the Storm Wolf. His name rippled across hushed lips, whispered like a prayer no one dared finish. They said he was more beast than man. They said his blood carried a curse older than the kingdom itself. They said his wolf, when unleashed, tore through armies without mercy. And now he stood here, framed by firelight and darkness, watching them with storm-grey eyes. Eyes that froze every heartbeat they touched. Nobles bowed, their polished crowns nearly scraping marble. Warriors dropped their gazes, fists pressed to chests. Even Celestine, radiant alpha of the night, stilled mid-dance, her laughter fading into silence. Elara pressed her spine to the pillar, as if the stone could hide her trembling. She wanted to vanish, to melt into shadow, but her gift betrayed her. She felt his presence before his gaze found her, a weight pressing on her chest, vast and unbearable, and then his eyes shifted. Slow, deliberate, dragging across jewelled gowns and sharpened armour, past beauty and strength, past power and pride, until they found her. Elara's heart stopped. Those storm-grey eyes locked on her, the forgotten Omega half hidden in shadow. A murmur swept through the crowd, sharp as a blade drawn from its sheath. Disbelief, shock, whispers rising like sparks. Why her? Who is she? What has she done? Elara shrank against the pillar, her hands cold and clammy. Her body screamed to break away, but her soul would not let her. She met his gaze, trembling, and felt her world tilt. He was not just looking at her. He was seeing her. Seeing the girl who had been invisible her whole life. And something within him shifted, like chains rattling loose in the dark. Aric Thorne moved. The Stormwolf stepped forward, his boots striking with steady rhythm. Every step sent shivers through the hall, the court parting before him like frightened waves. No one dared block his path, no one dared speak. All eyes turned, waiting, watching, fearing. His gaze never left Elara, not once. Her pulse thundered in her ears, so loud she thought the whole court must hear it. Her knees weakened, but the pillar kept her standing. He was closer now, the storm pressing down on her skin, into her lungs. She could smell him, steel, frost, and the faintest hint of wild earth. It was not the scent of safety. It was the scent of danger, raw and unyielding. And yet her gift trembled with something else, buried beneath the fear. Loneliness, grief, an emptiness so vast it nearly stole her breath. How could a king so feared, so untouchable, carry sorrow deeper than her own? The realization shook her more than his power. His steps slowed as he neared, the court frozen, silent, wide-eyed. Elara's lips parted, but no words came. She could not speak. She could only stand in the path of the storm and wait for it to consume her. Closer still he came, until his shadow swallowed hers whole. The marble beneath her feet seemed to tremble with his weight. The hall held its breath. Celestine's hands clenched at her sides, fury burning in her gaze, but she dared not move. The parents on the balcony stiffened, disbelief painted across their regal masks. Elara's gift throbbed within her, pressing against her chest until tears stung her eyes. So much power, so much pain. The Stormwolf stopped before her. A man carved of shadow and steel, eyes like winter storms locked on her trembling form. The silence roared. Elara's throat tightened, her heart screaming, her body frozen. And then he moved. Not a growl, not a command, not a gesture of wrath, but a hand. A single gloved hand extended toward her. The gasp that followed shook the hall like thunder. Shock spread like wildfire, disbelief tearing through whispers. The ruthless king, the cursed alpha of alphas, had extended his hand. Not to Celestine, radiant alpha, beloved jewel of the Silver Veil bloodline. Not to nobles adorned in silks or warriors crowned with strength. But to Elara, the forgotten Omega. The wolfless shadow pressed against the pillar. The one no one ever saw. Elara's breath hitched, her vision blurred at the edges. Her fingers trembled against the stone. She could not move. She could not understand. Her gift shrieked with emotions flooding from him, raw, dangerous, yet something else, something strange, something terrifyingly close to recognition. His wolf stirred within him, a dark presence straining beneath the surface, clawing, restless. But it did not rage. It reached. Toward her. Toward the Omega no one had ever chosen. The hall teetered on the edge of chaos, waiting, breathless, as the storm wolf stood before Elara, hand outstretched, the storm in his eyes softening by a fraction only she could see. The hush that lingered in the ballroom deepened as Aric Thorne extended his hand toward Elara, the forgotten Omega no one had ever truly seen. The moment stretched like eternity, each heartbeat echoing in her ears louder than the music that had faltered to silence. Every eye in the grand hall burned with disbelief. Whispers, sharp and poisonous, slithered from lip to lip. Why her? Why the wolfless girl pressed into shadows? Why the broken one no alpha would dare to notice? Elara's throat tightened, her chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She wanted to melt into the pillar behind her, to vanish before the storm of attention consumed her. But the King of Shadows stood before her, his eyes locked onto hers, with a ferocity that rooted her to the marble floor. His hand remained outstretched, steady, commanding, yet there was something unspoken lingering in his gaze, a flicker of need, of recognition, of hunger, not for flesh, but for something deeper. Her fingers trembled as though 1,000 unseen strings were pulling them forward, and when her palm met his, the air seemed to shatter. A current surged between them, sharp, overwhelming, alive. His hand was warm, but beneath the heat she felt the storm he carried. Not the rage of a king feared across the lands, but the weight of grief, the depth of loneliness carved into his very soul. Her gift, that fragile, cursed empathy that had always made her feel weak, flooded her senses now. His pain was not a whisper, but a roar, and it nearly brought her to her knees. She tasted the bitterness of betrayal, the ache of centuries of solitude, the sharp edges of a heart taught to trust no one. His storm wolf howled within him, and its sorrow nearly drowned her. Her body trembled, her knees threatening to buckle, yet she did not pull away. Instead, she gripped his hand with surprising strength, as if by holding him she could keep him from falling into the abyss she felt inside him. Gasps rose around them, sharp notes in the frozen symphony of the hall. No one had ever dared to touch him so freely, not without fear quaking through their bones. Yet here stood Elara, the invisible, the useless, the rejected Omega, standing before the storm wolf himself, refusing to retreat. His eyes narrowed, storm-grey, swirling like the ocean before a tempest. He led her forward, guiding her toward the dance floor that had emptied in terrified reverence. The nobles parted like shadows fleeing the light, giving them space as though the air around them burned. The orchestra faltered, bows trembling against strings, but with one sharp gesture of Aric's hand, the music resumed, low, haunting, uncertain. The first notes wrapped around them, fragile as glass. And then, with the weight of 1,000 judgments pressing against her back, Elara found herself moving across the polished marble, her body guided by the king's steady grip. Her heart thundered. She had never danced before, not like this. She had always been the watcher, never the participant, the girl pressed into corners while others spun like stars. Yet in Aric's arms, the steps came almost naturally, as though the music whispered secrets her body had always known but never dared to speak aloud. The room blurred around her. The chandeliers faded into distant constellations, the whispers into faint echoes. All she could feel was the king's presence, his hand at her waist, strong and unyielding, his breath brushing against her hair as he moved with unnerving grace for a man carved from shadow. And beneath his exterior, she felt his wolf stir. Not the monster they all feared, but a creature weary from endless rage, a beast who for the first time in years had grown silent. Her touch, small, fragile, insignificant to everyone else, had quieted the storm. Aric's gaze lingered on her face as though searching for something he could not name. His jaw tightened, his chest rising with a controlled breath, but his eyes betrayed him. They softened, just enough for her to glimpse the man beneath the crown of terror. He looked at her not as the forgotten Omega, not as the wolfless girl cursed to shadows, but as though she were something rare, something dangerous because it mattered. The nobles could not contain themselves. Some muttered in disbelief, others in fury. Jealousy sharpened their words like daggers thrown into the dark. "Why her?" hissed a beta noblewoman, her jewelled fingers clutching her fan so tightly the wood cracked. "She has no wolf. She disgraces the dance," spat another, voice dripping with contempt. Yet no one dared to step forward, no one dared to defy the storm wolf. Elara heard them, every cruel syllable slicing through her frauds. Gile heart. But when she lifted her gaze, she found herself caught once more in his storm-grey eyes, and the voices seemed to fade like smoke in the wind. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, someone truly saw her. Her breath caught when his grip tightened slightly at her waist, pulling her just a fraction closer. The world tilted, her body burning with the awareness of him, the most dangerous man alive, holding her as though she were both fragile glass and something he could not let slip away. The dance became a battle, not against each other, but against the world pressing in around them. Every step was defiance, every turn was rebellion. The ballroom had become a stage, and together they painted a story no one expected. A cursed king and a broken Omega, moving as though they had always been destined to find each other in the heart of the storm. Her chest ached from the emotions flooding her gift. His grief was vast, endless, a sea without shore. Yet beneath it, faint and trembling, she sensed something else, a thread of longing, a desperate hope buried so deep he had almost forgotten it existed. Tears stung her eyes, but she held them back, refusing to let weakness mar this impossible moment. She met his gaze, her own silent plea shining in her eyes. "I see you. I feel you. You are not alone." Aric's expression did not shift, but his hand at her waist flexed, the smallest crack in his carefully constructed armor. His wolf stirred again, restless, but not with rage, with wonder, with recognition. And as the music swelled, haunting and beautiful, the storm wolf and the forgotten Omega moved together in a dance that would be remembered long after the night had ended. But in the shadows of the hall, not all hearts were softened. Eyes watched with venomous intent, plots whispered into clenched fists. For where storms meet fragile flame, destruction or salvation always follows. Yet in that moment, as her hand rested against his chest and his heartbeat thundered steady beneath her palm, Elara did not think of danger. She thought only of this impossible truth. The most feared king in all the realms had chosen her, if only for a dance. And somehow, impossibly, she had quieted the darkness inside him. The haunting music faded into silence, leaving the ballroom drenched in a heavy stillness. Elara's chest still rose and fell in disbelief, her hand lingering in Aric's, her palm tingling from the warmth of his grip. For a fleeting moment, it seemed as if the world itself had held its breath, suspended in the fragile thread that bound the storm wolf and the forgotten Omega together. But not every gaze upon them was softened by awe. Some burned with envy, some with suspicion, and one in particular with venomous rage. Celestine stood at the edge of the dance floor, her lips curled into the faintest semblance of a smile, but her eyes glinted sharp as daggers. Her sister, the pale shadow she had spent her entire life eclipsing, was now at the centre of every whispered breath, every stolen glance. And worse, she was there because the most feared alpha in existence had chosen her. Celestine's nails dug crescents into her silk gown as she clapped politely with the crowd, masking her fury behind a mask of grace. But inside, her blood boiled. How dare Elara step into the light that was meant for her? How dare she, with her wolfless weakness, capture the attention Celestine had trained her whole life to command? When the dance ended and Aric released Elara's hand, the king's storm-grey eyes lingered on her just a moment longer. That single look was enough to ignite Celestine's rage into a wildfire. She swallowed it down, disguising the bitterness with a delicate tilt of her head. Her lips curved as though she were amused. But inside, jealousy coiled tighter and tighter, hissing like a serpent begging to strike. A voice slithered into her ear, low and smooth. "Quite the spectacle, is it not? See?" Lestine turned slightly, her gaze finding Lord Caelan, the rival alpha, whose ambition was whispered about in corridors and courtyards alike. His smile was polished, his posture impeccable, but his eyes, dark and hungry, betrayed the storm of schemes that brewed within him. He had been watching too, though not with awe, with calculation. "She does not deserve him," Celestine said, her voice low enough to remain unheard by anyone else. Her smile stayed perfectly composed, as if she were simply exchanging pleasantries with an acquaintance, but her words dripped with venom. "She has no wolf, no strength, no claim, and yet he chose her." Caelan's chuckle was quiet, but sharp enough to cut. "The mighty storm wolf, tamed by a fragile little flower. Fate is cruelly ironic, is it not?" Celestine's jaw clenched. "She has nothing, and still she steals everything." Caelan's gaze lingered on Elara, now standing uncertainly at the side of the hall, cheeks flushed, her presence trembling but radiant in the wake of her dance. "A king's choice can make or unmake nations," Caelan murmured. "And this choice unsettles the balance. The court will not accept it. The Pax will not kneel to a wolfless queen." His words were laced with poison, but beneath them throbbed an unspoken invitation. Celestine felt it coil around her like smoke. She turned her eyes back to him, studying the curve of his lips, the sharpness in his stare. She knew ambition when she saw it. It mirrored her own. "And what would you have done?" she asked softly, feigning curiosity, though her heart thudded with dangerous eagerness. Caelan's smile deepened, but it was not warm. It was the smile of a predator who had found another wolf willing to bare fangs beside him. "I would have chosen strength, power, someone worthy of his throne, someone who could command fear and loyalty with equal measure." His gaze flicked to her deliberately, lingering long enough for her to feel the weight of his implication. "Someone like you." Celestine's breath caught, a mixture of flattery and fury fueling the fire in her chest. For years, she had lived in the glow of her own accomplishments, adored for her beauty, praised for her strength. But now, with a single dance, her sister had stolen the story Celestine had written for herself. And here was Kaelin, fanning the flames of her resentment, whispering the truth she wanted so desperately to believe. "She will ruin him," Celestine said, her tone smooth, though her nails bit deeper into her palm. "She will weaken him, make him vulnerable, and the Pax, they will tear him apart for it." Kaelin leaned closer, his voice a velvet blade. "Unless we tear him down first." Her heart quickened at the words, the temptation sinking deeper than she wanted to admit. She turned her eyes back to the dance floor where Aric still stood, towering and unshaken, his storm-grey gaze scanning the room with quiet dominance. He was still the most feared alpha alive, still the unbreakable king. But even unbreakable kings could bleed. And Elara was his weakness. Celestine masked her thoughts with a soft laugh, tilting her head elegantly, but her eyes gleamed with resolve. "If his throne is to fall," she murmured, "then it will be because he chose wrongly." Kaelin extended his arm toward her as though inviting her to a dance, though the steps they were about to take were far darker than anything the orchestra could play. She placed her hand upon his, her smile flawless, her heart thrumming with poisonous ambition. The two of them slipped away from the glittering hall, shadows swallowing their figures as the revelry resumed behind them. None saw the venomous alliance forged that night. None saw how betrayal had begun to coil its way into the fragile bond just beginning to form between the cursed Alpha King and the forgotten Omega. For while Elara stood trembling in wonder at what had just transpired, she could not feel the serpent tightening its grip behind her back. The storm she had quieted was only the beginning. A darker tempest brewed in the shadows, born not of curses, but of envy, greed, and the cruel hunger for power. And Celestine, with her smile of glass and her heart of fire, had already chosen her side. The night after the ball dripped with whispers like poison running through veins. Celestine's laughter still echoed faintly in the corridors, though her mask of grace had long since been discarded in the shadows beside Kaelin's plotting smile. But dawn brought no peace. Instead, it carried a storm that would shake the castle walls themselves. The Royal Council convened in the grand chamber of Moonvale Castle. Sunlight bled through the high stained glass windows, spilling shards of colour across the long marble table. Lords and ladies gathered, their voices sharp with tension, their eyes flicking warily toward the throne at the chamber's head. And upon that throne sat Aric Thorne, the Stormwolf King, his shoulders carved of stone, his gaze colder than winter steel. Elara was not meant to be there, yet she stood quietly near the wall, her presence more shadow than flame. She had been summoned at Aric's command, though no one understood why. Her heart pounded, knowing she did not belong in such a place, yet his storm-grey eyes had anchored her there. The council spoke of borders, of alliances, of enemies pressing at the northern reaches, but Kaelin's voice cut through the chamber like a blade dipped in venom. He leaned forward, words laced with deliberate provocation. "The people whisper, my king. They say your judgment falters, that your choices grow strange." His eyes slid toward Elara with calculated malice. "They wonder why a king of storms dances with a broken girl who has no wolf." A ripple of discomfort spread through the chamber. Murmurs rose like restless bees. Aric's jaw tightened, his hand curling into a fist against the arm of his throne. The storm within him stirred. Kaelin smirked, feeding the fire. What strength is left in a king who abandons power for weakness? Will the pack still kneel, or will they rise against a throne softened by sentiment? The words struck like lightning against dry wood. Aric's breath deepened, his chest rising with the force of something vast and barely contained. His wolf clawed at the edges of his skin, a beast too long shackled, now roused by insult and challenge. His eyes darkened, storm grey swallowed by shadows, until they glowed with the inhuman gleam of the cursed. The council chamber shuddered with tension. Courtiers shifted in fear, their chairs scraping against marble as though distance could shield them from the gathering tempest. But Caelan did not flinch. His smile only sharpened, daring the king to shatter. And then it happened. A growl erupted from deep within Aric's chest, low and guttural, reverberating through the chamber walls. His hands flexed, and with a sudden violent motion, claws erupted from his fingertips, long and curved, tearing deep grooves into the polished marble floor. Gasps erupted. Cries of terror filled the hall. The council scrambled backward, robes tangling as nobles fled from the throne's shadow. Aric rose, his body twisting, bones cracking as the cursed transformation consumed him. Armor strained, fabric tore, and the monstrous wolf within burst forth. He towered over them now, no longer a man, but a beast cloaked in shadows and fury. His fangs gleamed, his roar split the chamber like thunder, and the chandeliers above rattled as though the castle itself trembled in fear. Screams erupted. Courtiers stumbled over one another in their desperate attempt to escape. Guards hesitated, their spears trembling in their hands, none daring to strike but all too terrified to approach. The once mighty council was reduced to chaos, a swirl of shrieks and shattering decorum. But through the terror, one figure did not flee. One figure stood trembling, her knees weak, her palms clay. Yet her heart unwilling to abandon him. Elara. Her chest tightened as the waves of his rage crashed against her gift. It was overwhelming, an ocean of fury, grief, and despair that threatened to drown her mind. She could barely breathe beneath its weight, her body shaking from the force of his agony. But within the storm, she also felt the truth, the pain of betrayal, the scars of endless loneliness, the constant war within his cursed soul. "Elara, no!" someone cried, but her feet moved of their own accord, carrying her forward. Step by step, she approached the monstrous king, who could end her life with a single swipe of his claws. Every instinct screamed for her to run, to hide, to save herself, but her heart refused. Her voice trembled when it first broke free, barely louder than the storming breaths of the beast. "Aric!" The wolf's glowing eyes snapped toward her, a snarl ripping through his throat. The courtiers gasped, certain that this fragile Omega had sealed her death. But Elara did not falter. She pressed a hand to her chest, forcing her breath steady. "I see you," she whispered, her voice quivering but clear. "I feel you. You are not just the beast they fear. You are more than this storm." The beast roared, claws gouging deeper into the stone, his massive frame shaking with fury. Yet Elara stepped closer still, her body trembling violently, tears streaking her cheeks. Her empathy poured outward, unguarded, a fragile thread of humanity reaching for the heart buried beneath the monster. "They call me broken," she continued, her words cracking with emotion. "But it is my curse that lets me feel what others cannot. And I feel you, Aric. I feel your pain, your loneliness, your endless grief. You are not alone anymore, not while I am here." Her words wove through the chaos like a prayer, soft yet unyielding. The monstrous wolf's chest heaved, his fangs bared, but his movements faltered. The glowing rage in his eyes flickered, as though her voice had pierced the storm. Elara reached out her hand, trembling, fragile, absurd against the shadowed, king of nightmares. Yet her palm did not waver. "Come back," she whispered, her voice breaking under the weight of love she had never spoken before. "Come back to me." For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold its breath. And then, impossibly, the beast stilled. The monstrous form shuddered, claws retracting slowly, fur receding into skin, muscles twisting back into the shape of a man. The storm within him groaned like a wounded beast as it retreated, dragged back not by chains, but by the fragile thread of a woman's voice. When the echoes of transformation faded, Aric collapsed to one knee upon the ruined marble floor, his chest heaving, his body slick with sweat. He lifted his eyes, storm grey once more, human and weary, and found Elara's trembling figure before him, her hand still outstretched. The court, silent and wide-eyed, looked on in stunned disbelief. None could understand what they had just witnessed, but Aric understood. Her. It was her voice, her empathy, her unyielding courage that had pulled him from the brink of destruction. The cursed wolf within him had bowed not to chains, not to fear, but to Elara, the broken Omega no one had ever wanted. And as their eyes met, storm and flame locked in unspoken truth, the world around them seemed to vanish, for in that fragile moment he was hers. The silence that followed was heavier than stone. Aric knelt on the shattered marble floor, his body trembling, the last traces of the beast receding into his skin. His breath came in ragged pulls, his storm-grey eyes lifted, fixed on the fragile figure before him. Elara still stood, her hand trembling in the air, her tears glistening like dew. For a moment, no one dared to speak, no one dared to move. The air itself seemed carved from disbelief. And then the whispers began. They slithered through the chamber like smoke, hushed yet sharp enough to wound. She stopped him. She tamed the beast. No, she bewitched him. Can't you see? She's dangerous. Words like arrows filled the air, striking Elara from all sides. She felt them pierce her skin, though no wound showed. Her heart pounded, fragile as glass, while eyes full of fear and awe devoured her every breath. Some bowed their heads, stunned by what they had witnessed. Others recoiled as though she were cursed herself, a witch cloaked in mortal flesh. The woman they had once dismissed as a broken shadow was now the centre of every whispered rumour, the subject of both awe and suspicion. Aric forced himself to his feet, his chest heaving, his jaw taut with fury. His gaze swept the chamber, daring any to step forward, daring any to challenge what they had seen. His claws might have retreated, but the storm within him was far from gone. The courtiers shrank back beneath his stare, yet even they could not silence their tongues. And in the shadows, Celestine smiled. Her mask of concern was flawless, her every gesture graceful as she bent her head in false reverence. But her heart sang with venom. She fanned the whispers with gentle touches of poison, her words sliding between nobles like silk ribbons. "Did you see her eyes?" she murmured to one trembling lady. "Gleaming with unnatural light." To another lord she breathed, "No Omega has such power unless she dabbles in forbidden ways." And to all she met, she offered the same sweet poison. Perhaps the king is not saved. Perhaps he is ensnared. Like embers caught in wind, her lies spread quickly, sparking doubt in hearts already shaken by fear. Elara felt it. Her gift burned with the weight of their suspicion, their scorn pressing like stones upon her chest. She had not meant to be seen. She had not asked for the storm to rest in her presence. Yet here she stood, and their hatred clawed at her as surely as the beast's fury had. Her knees trembled, her throat tightened, but she did not weep. Not here, not before them. Aric turned his eyes to her, and for a moment the world quieted. There was no beast in him. Now, only a man undone, his gaze dark with something deeper than rage, guilt, fear. He had felt the edge of his curse, the jaws of it snapping close to her fragile throat. And though she had saved him, a voice gnawed at his heart like a relentless shadow. Next time, I may not return. Next time, I may kill her. He clenched his fists, the marble beneath him still scarred from his claws. The thought of her lifeless body, struck down by his own hand, sickened him more than any enemy's blade. He could command armies, crush rebellions, shatter walls with his fury, but he could not command the curse in his blood. And now it was bound to her, his salvation and his greatest fear. Elara looked into his storm-grey eyes and saw it all, the guilt, the torment, the dread that he was a weapon even against her. And though her heart ached, though her body trembled from exhaustion, she stepped closer. Her hand brushed against his arm, not with the strength of an alpha, but with the quiet courage of someone who had nothing yet still gave everything. "You are not only the beast," she whispered softly, so low only he could hear. "Do not let them make you believe it." Her words settled into him like fragile light piercing a cavern, but even light could not erase the weight of shadow. Behind them, the courtiers whispered still. Awe clung to some voices, yes, but poison thickened in others. The fracture had begun, a crack running through loyalty, through faith. To some, Elara was a miracle. To others, she was a curse given flesh. And Celestine ensured the crack widened. Her voice, smooth as silk, wove stories through the halls. "She bewitched him," she whispered. "She bent his will with some secret magic. Why else would the storm wolf kneel to her voice?" The seeds took root, watered by envy, nourished by fear. Soon, what had been admiration turned to doubt, and what had been awe harder, Ned into hatred. That night, as the castle hushed into uneasy silence, Elara stood by her chamber window, her heart heavy with the weight of the day. The stars glittered above, distant and unfeeling, while the wind pressed cold against her skin. She wrapped her arms around herself, her breath trembling. She had saved him, yes, but at what cost? Her gift, the very thing she had cursed all her life, had made her the centre of a storm she could not control. She could feel the loathing of the court as if it pressed against her ribs, each heartbeat bruised by their disdain. And still, beneath it all, her heart betrayed her. It longed for him. It longed for the man whose storm had quieted beneath her hand, for the king who had looked at her as though she were more than shadow. But could she survive in a world that had never wanted her? Could she endure love that might one day destroy her? Across the castle, Aric sat alone in the dark of his chamber, his hands braced against his knees, his head bowed. His storm wolf stirred restlessly beneath his skin, whispering reminders of claws and blood. He closed his eyes, and Elara's voice echoed through him, fragile and unwavering. "Come back to me." It had pulled him from the brink, yet it was that same voice that haunted him now, for he knew his beast could just as easily silence it forever. And so, even as loyalty fractured around them, as love and suspicion warred in equal measure, one truth carved itself into both their hearts. They were bound. by storm, by fear, by love that should never have been. The night that had begun with whispered doubts now cracked open with the thunder of betrayal. The once glorious halls of Moonvale Castle trembled under the echo of boots and the clash of steel. Kaelin's forces surged like a tide of shadows through corridors lined with silver banners, cutting down guards loyal to the crown. Panic spread in waves, crashing against walls that had stood for centuries. Screams pierced the air, mingling with the acrid scent of burning torches, and the grand ballroom, the place where Elara had first been invisible, where Aric had first seen her, was now defiled with the red smear of blood. The chandeliers overhead shook with each blow of the battle, crystals raining like tears from the heavens, glittering shards that cut into the marble floor. Elara stood frozen at first, her heart pounding so loud she thought it would betray her hiding place. She had once hidden behind pillars in this very hall, trying to shrink into nothingness, but tonight she was thrust into the centre of its storm. The very floor that had witnessed her loneliness was now wet with war. Her empathic senses, once considered her curse, throbbed painfully with the weight of terror and fury around her. Each emotion pressed against her chest until she thought she would shatter. And yet, at the heart of the chaos, she felt something else, a sharp strand of betrayal, venomous and familiar. Celestine. Celestine entered like a flame wrapped in silk, her golden gown streaked with dust and the shadow of rage. She stood across the room, her chin raised, her beauty still luminous even beneath the stain of treachery. But her eyes, once bright with the pride of an alpha sister, now burned with poisonous jealousy. Her smile curled like a blade as her gaze landed on Elara, fragile yet unbroken. The clash of swords around them faded into a muted hum. All Elara could hear was the thunder of her sister's words before they were even spoken. "So it's true!" Celestine's voice cut across the hall, sharper than steel, carrying venom laced with bitterness. "The Forgotten One, the broken Omega, is now the darling of the Alpha King. You, Elara. You, who were never meant to stand in the light." She stepped closer, her gown brushing through bloodstains, her every movement a performance for the watching soldiers. "Do you know what they call you now? His weakness, his chain, the witch who bewitched a king with pitiful eyes and trembling hands." Elara's throat tightened. For years she had endured her sister's scorn in silence. For years she had believed she deserved it. But tonight, with the weight of betrayal pressing down, she found her voice. "I never asked for his gaze. I never sought the crown or your envy. All I ever wanted was peace." Her voice wavered, but it carried. "You are my sister, Celestine. And even now I would have stood at your side had you not chosen hate." Celestine laughed, though the sound was brittle, sharp at the edges. "Peace?" she spat. "There is no peace for the weak. I was destined to rule, and you were destined to serve. That is how the world was meant to be. But you—" Her voice cracked with fury as she pointed at Elara. "You ruined everything. You stole the eyes of the king. You made me invisible." "No," Elara whispered, stepping forward despite her trembling. "I did not make you invisible. Your pride did. Your hunger for power blinded you to the love you already had. From me, from those who believed in you, but you traded it away for Kaelin's promises." At the mention of Kaelin's name, Celestine's expression flickered. For a heartbeat, doubt rippled through her pride, but she masked it with another sneer. "Kaelin is a true alpha. Together we will rule stronger than Aric ever could. And you, little sister, will finally be forgotten forever. But fate is a cruel storyteller. From the shadows behind her, Kaelin emerged, tall, imposing, his armour glinting under the broken light of the chandeliers. His eyes, once soft with feigned devotion, were now cold, calculating steel. Celestine turned toward him, expecting solidarity, the affirmation of their unholy pact. But instead, she saw only disdain. His lips curved into a smile, not of love, but of victory. "You were useful, Celestine," Kaelin said, his voice smooth as poisoned wine. "But I never shared thrones. Queens are burdensome things. I needed your access, your knowledge of the castle's defences. That is all." The word struck harder than any blade. Celestine's face crumbled, her confidence unravelling before the court she had sought to rule. Her eyes widened, shimmering with something Elara had never seen in them before. Fear. "You lied to me," Celestine breathed, her voice breaking. "You said—" "I said what I needed to," Kaelin interrupted, his tone merciless. "And now you have outlived your purpose." Time slowed. Elara's empathic gift flared, pulling her into the maelstrom of her sister's emotions. Beneath the anger, beneath the arrogance, there was a hollow well of loneliness, of a desperate longing to be seen, to be loved, to matter. Celestine had built her pride as armour, but inside she had always been as fragile as Elara herself. Tears pricked Elara's eyes as she saw it, as she felt it. Kaelin's sword flashed, and betrayal became final. Celestine staggered, a cry tearing from her lips, not of hatred, but of regret. Blood bloomed across her gown like a crimson flower, staining the golden silk. She fell to her knees, her eyes finding Elara's across the chaos. For the first time, there was no venom in her gaze, only sorrow. I was wrong," she whispered, her voice trembling like the child she once was. "Sister, forgive me." Elara rushed forward, falling to her knees as she caught her sister's hand. Hot blood slicked her fingers as Celestine's grip weakened. "I forgive you," Elara choked out, tears spilling freely. "Always, Celestine, always." Celestine's final breath left her lips in a sigh, her hand slipping from Elara's grasp. Her proud head tilted and her eyes dimmed, the golden fire extinguished. The hall that had once echoed with her laughter now held only silence where she had fallen. Elara bowed her head over her sister's body, grief shaking her shoulders. Around them battle still raged, but for that moment time belonged to sorrow. Celestine, the sister who had mocked her, envied her, betrayed her, was nay, undone not by Elara's hand, but by her own ambition. And as Elara lifted her tear-streaked face, she knew that love had proven stronger than pride, even in the end. The ballroom, once drenched in blood and betrayal, now lay heavy in silence. The clang of steel and the roar of battle had faded into echoes, leaving only the scent of smoke and the stillness of loss. Elara still knelt beside her fallen sister, her heart torn open, her tears soaking into Celestine's cooling hand. She whispered one last prayer into the void, then lifted her face toward the chaos that remained. Her grief had not yet dried when she felt it, the pulse of pain, the cry of another heart breaking. It was not from the fallen around her, it was from him. Across the shattered hall, King Aric Thorne stood like a spectre of war, his broad frame trembling, his armour torn and stained crimson. Blood trickled down his cheek, across the scars already carved into his flesh. His chest rose and fell in shallow gasps, and behind his storm-grey eyes the beast raged. His cursed wolf strained against the fragile leash of his will, its monstrous shadow flickering just beneath his skin. His claws scraped against the marble floor, cracking stone with each trembling step. The courtiers, battered survivors of the night, shrank from him in fear. They had seen the beast unleashed once before. They knew what he was capable of. Whispers slithered through the silence. Monster, cursed, doom. Their king, feared as the storm wolf, was losing his battle against himself. And yet Elara, fragile Omega, moved toward him. Her tears still streaked her cheeks, her body trembling from grief and exhaustion, but her heart refused to yield. She crossed the blood-stained floor, stepping through shards of crystal and ash until she stood before him. Aric's head lowered, his storm-tossed eyes locking on hers. For a moment, he looked less like a king and more like a man on the edge of breaking. "Stay back!" he rasped, his voice thick with agony. "Elara, my control is slipping. I will hurt you. I cannot—" His voice faltered as his claws dug deeper into the stone. "I am not safe." Elara shook her head, her voice quiet but steady, carrying across the ruined hall like a prayer. "You are safe with me. You always will be." He flinched, as if her words were a blade cutting through the darkness, exposing wounds deeper than blood. The beast inside him snarled, furious at her defiance, but her presence wrapped around him like a tether. She reached out, her hands trembling, and pressed them against his chest. Beneath her touch, his heart thundered, wild and unrestrained. But it began to slow as her tears fell onto his skin. "I feel your pain," she whispered, her gift flowing from her like light breaking through storm clouds. "All the loneliness, all the weight you've carried. But you are not alone anymore. You are not the monster they fear. You are the man who found me when no one else saw me. You are the king whose soul still fights to love, even when cursed." Her voice cracked with emotion, but she did not falter. Her empathy, the very thing mocked as weakness, reached for him, wrapped around his breaking heart, and anchored it. Slowly, painfully, the beast within him stilled. His claws retracted, his trembling slowed, and his storm-grey eyes softened into something fragile and human. Before the eyes of his court, the feared storm wolf bowed, not as a king demanding loyalty, but as a man yielding his heart. His knees hit the marble floor before her, the sound ringing through the shattered hall. He bowed his head, his forehead pressing against her hand, as though she were the crown he chose. Gasps rippled through the room. The courtiers, who had known only his fury, watched in stunned silence as their king knelt to an Omega. "Elara," he whispered, his voice breaking, "you saved me. Again and again, when I thought I was lost to the storm, you pulled me back. I have nothing left to give. You but myself, flawed, cursed, broken. But if you will have me, I am yours, not as your king, as your mate." Tears blurred her vision, her heart shattering and mending all at once. She sank to her knees before him, taking his face in her trembling hands. "You were never broken to me, Aric. You were always the storm that called to my soul, and I am yours, always." The court, who had whispered against her, who had laughed at her weakness, now fell silent in awe. They saw not weakness in her tears, but strength. They saw not a cursed king, but a man redeemed by love. Slowly, one by one, they bowed, not to the monster, not to the curse, but to the bond that had saved them all. As dawn spilled over Moonvale Castle, golden light breaking through shattered windows, Elara rose from the marble floor. No longer did she shrink into shadows. No longer did she bow her head to judgment. The light kissed her hair, glowed against her tear-streaked cheeks, and crowned her in radiance. She was no longer the forgotten Omega. She was the Storm Queen. Her love had rewritten the fate of them all.